You know what the worst part is? They actually think this is our bad side. Captain Alexandra Novak chuckled, casually adjusting her combat helmet while plasma fire scorched the reinforced bunker wall behind her. Lieutenant Marcus Jones glanced over at her with that particular brand of exhausted amusement only veteran soldiers can muster. Shit, Cap, don't tell them that. Let them think we're going full berserker. Better for morale, theirs and ours. Did you see the broadcast from their Supreme Commander? Specialist Devin Williams chimed in, his dark fingers working deftly to reassemble his pulse rifle. That pompous six-armed jackass actually said they were unleashing hell upon the human vermin. Like, seriously? Have they not opened a history book? Bold of you to assume the Drastians have history books, replied Marcus. Or that they'd bother reading about some insignificant bipedal mammals who just happened to hold off their invincible armada at Jupiter. The bunker shook again as another barrage hit somewhere nearby. None of the soldiers flinched. 10 credits, says High Command names this Operation Mild Inconvenience, Alexandra said with a smirk. Williams snorted. You're on. My money's on Operation Overdue Pest Control. Over the tactical comm, a voice crackled. All units, prepare for counter-offensive T-3 minutes. Finally, Marcus sighed, rising to his feet and checking his weapon systems. I was getting bored. Admiral Zhou Wei of the United Earth Defense Force stood with perfect posture on the bridge of the UES Reckoning, arms clasped behind his back as he observed the holographic display of the battlefield. The Drastian fleet, what remained of it, was regrouping at the edge of Neptune's orbit. They've lost 43% of their capital ships, and yet they're still pressing the attack. His XO, Commander Abigail Foster, noted with a hint of professional admiration. You have to give them points for persistence. Joe's expression remained impassive. Persistence without adaptation is just slow suicide, Commander. Still, sir, their Hellfire offensive, Foster couldn't help but smirk at the name, has cost us 3 orbital platforms and damaged the Ganymede shipyards. Acceptable losses, Joe replied, his voice cool, especially considering what they're about to lose. The bridge fell silent as the Admiral tapped a series of commands into his console. The holographic display shifted, revealing hundreds of previously hidden signatures now activating throughout the solar system. Operation Pandora's Box is now active, he announced. Let's show the Drastian Imperium what happens when you mistake human restraint for human limitation. Foster's eyes widened as she processed the tactical data now flooding across her screens. Sir, are those all? Yes, Commander. Every prototype weapon system we've been sitting on for the last decade. Every too unethical or too destructive project that the Ethics Committee shelved. Joe's lips curved into a rare smile. The Drastians wanted to unleash hell? We're about to show them what that actually means. Supreme War Strategist, Kavarin, of the Drastian Imperium stared at the sensor readings in disbelief. His upper arms trembled while his lower ones gripped the command console tightly. Impossible! He hissed through his chitinous mandibles. These readings cannot be accurate. They have been verified, Eminence, Subcommander Drevik replied, his posture showing appropriate submission. The humans have deployed weapons we have not observed before. Explain, Kavarin demanded. The Jupiter Defense Fleet reports human vessels utilizing what appears to be localized gravity manipulation technology. 2 of our dreadnoughts were compressed into spheres no larger than scout vessels before detonating. Drevik's voice quavered. The Mars contingent reports attacks by what our scientists can only describe as weaponized entropy fields. Organic matter ages centuries in seconds. Mechanical systems degrade as if exposed to millennia of wear. Kavarin's compound eyes dilated in shock. How is this possible? Our intelligence indicated the humans were technological infants compared to the Imperium. Their defensive capabilities were impressive but limited. A junior communications officer approached and prostrated himself before speaking. Eminence, we are receiving a transmission from a human vessel. They request to speak with you directly. Kavarin hissed in frustration, but nodded his assent. The main view screen flickered to life, revealing a human female with dark skin and close-cropped silver hair. Her uniform bore insignias Kavarin didn't recognize. This is Director Imani Jackson of United Earth Special Weapons Division, she stated without preamble. I'm reaching out as a professional courtesy to explain what's happening, since your intelligence seems woefully inadequate. You dare, Kavarin began, but Jackson cut him off. For the past century, we humans have been developing weapons that we deemed too horrible to use against one another. Weapons that violated our own ethical standards for warfare. We locked them away, hoping never to need them. Her expression hardened. Then you invaded our system, bombed our colonies, and declared your intention to exterminate our species. So, congratulations, you've accomplished something remarkable. You've united humanity in the decision that ethical warfare is a luxury we can no longer afford. Kavarin felt a chill run through his thorax. You're bluffing. These are merely desperate tactics. Jackson's laugh cut him off. It was a sound utterly devoid of humor. Supreme war strategist, what you're witnessing isn't desperation, it's restraint finally being abandoned. Did you really think a species that survived its own nuclear age, that terraformed Mars in a generation, that developed FTL travel using nothing but mathematics and sheer stubborn will, did you truly believe we couldn't annihilate your forces if we wanted to? She leaned closer to the camera. We didn't want to become monsters. But if that's what survival requires, then you're about to learn why every predator species in Earth's history evolved to fear us. The transmission cut off abruptly. Kavarin stared at the blank screen, suddenly aware of the taste of fear in his mouth. Cha-cha-cha-cha. In the medical bay of Forward Operating Base Asclepius on Europa, Dr. Eliza Kim worked frantically to stabilize a wounded Marine. His combat armor had partially melted into his skin from a direct hit by Drastian plasma weaponry. Hold still, Corporal Okafor, she instructed calmly, despite the chaos around her. The nanomed injectors need precise placement. Doc, Okafor rasped through clenched teeth. Am I gonna make it? Dr. Kim met his gaze steadily. With these new regenerative protocols, you'll be back annoying your squad mates within a week. A flash of surprise crossed his pain-racked face. Thought those were still experimental. Ethics Committee hasn't cleared them. Ethics Committee has temporarily suspended all restrictions on medical technology, she replied, pressing the injector against his neck. War changes priorities. The door to the medical bay hissed open, and a figure in the distinctive black uniform of military intelligence strode in. Lieutenant Commander Raj Henderson scanned the room before spotting Dr. Kim. Doctor, a moment, he requested, though his tone made it clear it wasn't optional. Kim finished setting up Okafor's treatment and followed Henderson to a quiet corner of the medical bay. I need your expertise on something urgent, Henderson said without preamble, activating a small holographic projector. It displayed what appeared to be cellular structures, but with bizarre anomalies. We've intercepted Drastian communications indicating their ground forces are deploying a biological agent against our troops on Ganymede. Kim studied the projection, her expression darkening. This is engineered to target human DNA specifically. Nasty stuff. Henderson nodded grimly. R&D has developed a countermeasure, but they need someone with your background in xenobiology to fine-tune it. A countermeasure? Kim raised an eyebrow. Or a counterweapon? Henderson met her gaze unflinchingly. Both. Protocol Nemesis has been authorized. Kim's eyes widened fractionally, the only indication of her shock. Protocol Nemesis was theoretical, a worst-case scenario response to biological warfare. Engineered pathogens that could be targeted with near-perfect genetic specificity. We swore we'd never... They started this, Doctor, Henderson interrupted quietly. We're just ensuring they regret it. Kim was silent for a long moment before nodding. I'll need a full lab and access to the Drastian genetic database we captured last month. Already arranged. There's a shuttle waiting. As they walked toward the exit, Henderson added, For what it's worth, the deployment authorization requires that any bioweapon be curable. We're not looking to commit xenocide, just to send a message they won't forget. Small comfort, Kim muttered, but followed nonetheless. Chummy. In orbit around Titan, the experimental UES Prometheus drifted silently, its revolutionary cloaking system rendering it invisible to Drastian sensors. Inside the ship's cavernous engineering bay, Chief Engineer Alejandro Torres supervised the final adjustments to what the crew had unofficially dubbed God's Fly Swatter. Power synchronization at 98.7%, reported his assistant, Lieutenant Olivia Nakamura. That's well within operational parameters. Torres nodded, his weathered face illuminated by the blue glow of the massive device dominating the center of the bay. Begin the arming sequence. I want a full systems check before we rendezvous with the battle group. Still can't believe they greenlit this thing, Nakamura said, her fingers dancing across the control interface. 3 years they told us it was too destabilizing to planetary bodies, and potentially catastrophic to space-time integrity. Torres snorted. Amazing how quickly ethical concerns evaporate when six-legged aliens start dropping city killers on your colonies. He patted the massive housing of the quantum resonance weapon affectionately. Besides, the math checks out now, mostly. Mostly? Nakamura arched an eyebrow. We reduced the probability of accidentally creating a localized black hole to less than 0.1%. Torres grinned. I'd call that a win. The intercom crackled. Engineering, this is the bridge. Admiral Patel is requesting a status update. Torres straightened. Tell the Admiral we're green across the board. The QR weapon is hot and ready for deployment. Acknowledged. Prepare for combat maneuvers. We've received intelligence that the Drastian command carrier has been located. Torres and Nakamura exchanged glances. The massive Drastian vessel, nearly the size of a small moon, had been coordinating the invasion from the relative safety of Saturn's rings. Looks like the big bugs are about to learn why humans label our most dangerous inventions with warning signs instead of patents, Torres remarked. And why we keep the really scary stuff locked away, Nakamura added, until someone gives us a reason not to. At the diplomatic enclave on Luna, Ambassador Tomas Reyes faced the assembled representatives of Earth's neutral alien allies, with a composed expression that belied the gravity of the moment. The United Earth government understands your concerns, he acknowledged, addressing the 7 diverse beings seated around the conference table. The weapons we've deployed against the Drastian Imperium are admittedly extreme. Ambassador Vkr'lak of the Arcturian Confederation, a tall being with silvery skin and 4 eyes, leaned forward. Ambassador Reyes, extreme is a gross understatement. Your forces have deployed technology that violates at least 3 provisions of the Galactic Concord on ethical warfare. Technology we never wanted to use, Reyes countered smoothly. Technology we developed and then locked away because we recognized its terrible potential. Yet you built it nonetheless, observed Khalith, the gelatinous representative of the Vkr'lak collective. Their translucent body pulsed with colors conveying concern and accusation. Reyes spread his hands in a gesture that transcended species barriers. Of course we did. Humanity has always prepared for worst-case scenarios. We have bunkers beneath our cities, emergency protocols for natural disasters, evacuation plans for our settlements. We build safeguards precisely because we hope never to need them. These are not safeguards, rumbled Dronval of the hegemony. The massive reptilian shifted his considerable bulk uncomfortably. These are weapons of mass destruction being deployed with apparent disregard for long-term consequences. Reyes's expression hardened slightly. With all due respect, Administrator Dronval, when an alien armada appears in your home system, declares your species unworthy of existence, and proceeds to bombard your colonies with antimatter weapons, long-term consequences take a back seat to survival. He stood, activating a holographic display that showed the devastation on Mars and the orbital habitats of Jupiter. 3 million dead in the first wave alone, civilian targets deliberately struck, infrastructure specifically designed to maximize casualties. Reyes's voice remained level, but his eyes burned. The Drastians didn't come to conquer, they came to exterminate. An uncomfortable silence fell over the chamber. What do you wish of us? Asked Vkr'lak finally. If you have violated the Concord, regardless of provocation, we cannot intervene on your behalf. We're not asking for intervention, Reyes replied. We're asking for understanding, and for you to convey a message to any other species who might be watching this conflict with interest. He looked each ambassador in the eye before continuing. Humanity locked away its most terrible weapons not because we couldn't build them, but because we chose restraint. We recognized our capacity for destruction and placed ethical limitations upon ourselves. His voice dropped to a near whisper that somehow filled the room. But those limitations were our choice, and what we chose, we can unchoose. Reyes straightened to his full height. Tell your governments this. Humanity hopes to return to peace, to cooperation, to the better angels of our nature. But if pushed to extinction, we will bring down the heavens themselves before we go quietly into the night. The silence that followed was profound. Chateau. Specialist Devin Williams crouched behind the twisted wreckage of what had once been a Drastian assault vehicle, the acrid smell of burnt chitin and alien hydraulic fluid filling his nostrils despite his helmet's filtration system. Clear on the east flank, he reported over the tactical comm. Moving to checkpoint Delta. Copy that, Captain Novak's voice replied. Be advised, enemy forces are regrouping at the primary installation. Looks like they're setting up a last stand. Williams moved with practiced efficiency through the ruined landscape of what had once been a thriving research outpost on Ganymede. 3 weeks of brutal fighting had transformed it into a hellscape of craters and debris. Yet somehow it felt like the tide was finally turning. His HUD pinged, alerting him to movement ahead. Williams froze, weapon ready, but the IFF system identified the approaching figure as friendly. Lieutenant Jones materialized from behind a collapsed habitat module, his armor scorched and dented but functional. "Fancy meeting you here, Specialist." "Sir," Williams acknowledged with a nod. "Thought you were with the captain's team." "Got separated during that last artillery barrage," Jones explained, falling into step beside Williams. "Figured I'd link up with whoever was closest." They moved cautiously toward their objective, a communications hub the Drastians had commandeered as a forward command post. "Word from orbit is the bugs are pulling back across the system," Jones commented as they navigated the battlefield. "Apparently getting a taste of our forbidden tech cabinet spooked them good." Williams grunted. "Can't blame them. Did you see what the Prometheus did to their command carrier? I didn't even know matter could be unmade like that." "That's the thing about humans," Jones replied. "We think of the most terrifying shit possible. Then we figure out how to make it real. Then we lock it in a vault and label it break glass in case of extinction-level emergency." He chuckled grimly. "And the Drastians just took a sledgehammer to that glass." They paused at the edge of a clearing, the communications hub visible about 200 meters ahead. Drastian soldiers patrolled the perimeter, fewer than expected. "You ever wonder if we've gone too far?" Williams asked suddenly, surprising himself with the question. Jones was silent for a moment before answering. "My grandmother was on Ceres when they hit it. 12,000 civilians, no military targets." His voice was flat. "So no, I don't wonder if we've gone too far. I wonder why we waited so long." Williams nodded slowly. "Fair enough." Their comms crackled. "All ground forces be advised," came Captain Novak's voice. "Operation Pandora's Mercy is now in effect. I repeat, Pandora's Mercy is a go. Fall back to extraction points immediately." Jones and Williams exchanged glances. "Pandora's Mercy?" Williams questioned. "What happened to good old Pandora's box?" "Guess someone up the chain decided to offer terms," Jones replied, already plotting their retreat path on his HUD. "Let's move." As they began their withdrawal, a sudden, unnatural silence fell across the battlefield. The constant background noise of weapons fire and explosions simply ceased. Williams glanced back to see a strange shimming field enveloping the Drastian installation. Within seconds, every alien soldier visible simply collapsed to the ground. "What the hell was that?" he breathed. Jones shook his head slowly. "I think we just witnessed the mercy part of the operation." "They're not dead," Williams realized, zooming in with his helmet's optics. "They're paralyzed. Probably some neurotoxin tailored to their physiology," Jones surmised. "Non-lethal but completely incapacitating." He let out a low whistle. "Guess High Command decided to show them we could have killed them all but chose not to." "Message received, I'd say." As they continued toward the extraction point, Williams couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of relief and unease. Humanity had revealed the depths of its capacity for violence, and then deliberately pulled back from the brink. He wasn't sure which was more terrifying. Admiral Joe stood motionless as the holographic representation of Supreme War Strategist Kavarin flickered before him. The Drastian leader's posture conveyed a mixture of defiance and the unmistakable body language of defeat. "The Drastian Imperium acknowledges the unexpected capabilities demonstrated by Earth forces," Kavarin stated, his translator rendering his chittering speech into flat, emotionless standard. "We propose an immediate cessation of hostilities." Joe's expression remained impassive. "Terms?" "Full withdrawal from your solar system, exchange of prisoners, a demilitarized zone established at the boundary of your territorial claims." "And reparations for the colonies you destroyed?" Joe inquired with dangerous softness. Kavarin's upper limbs twitched in what might have been agitation or discomfort. "The Imperium does not traditionally—" "This is not a traditional situation," Joe interrupted. "You launched an unprovoked attack on a species that had shown no aggression toward the Imperium. You targeted civilian populations deliberately, and when we defended ourselves, you declared your intention to eradicate humanity entirely." He leaned forward slightly. "Under Drastian military doctrine, such an enemy would be shown no mercy, correct?" Kavarin's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of stress. "That is, our way, yes. Yet here you are, alive, capable of offering terms." Joe let the implication hang in the air. "Do you understand why?" "To demonstrate your power," Kavarin replied immediately. To show that you could have annihilated us but chose restraint. Joe shook his head slowly. No, war strategist. To demonstrate our humanity. He straightened, hands clasped behind his back. 50 years ago, when we first ventured beyond our solar system, we discovered the wreckage of a civilization near Tau Ceti. Their records indicated they had been destroyed by an aggressive species that found them inconvenient. We never identified the aggressors, but we learned a valuable lesson. In a universe where intelligent life can be snuffed out on a whim, preservation becomes a moral imperative. Joe's eyes hardened. We will accept your withdrawal and the establishment of a DMZ. We will exchange prisoners, and you will provide resources to rebuild what you destroyed. Not because we demand tribute, but because all intelligent life has value, and you must acknowledge the value of what you attempted to eradicate. Kavarin was silent for several moments before responding. And if we refuse these terms? Then we will demonstrate that what you have witnessed thus far was merely a warning shot. Another long silence. The Imperium accepts your terms, Kavarin finally stated. Withdrawal will commence immediately. As the transmission ended, Commander Foster approached. Do you think they'll honor the agreement, sir? Joe turned to face her. They will. Not because they've suddenly developed respect for humanity, but because they've developed something far more useful. Fear. Fear of our weapons? Fear of a species that creates nightmare technologies, locks them away on ethical grounds, and then uses them with surgical precision when provoked. Joe allowed himself a small smile. The Drastians miscalculated badly. They assumed our restraint was weakness, never considering that perhaps we were restraining monsters of our own creation. Foster nodded thoughtfully. A lesson the rest of the galaxy would do well to note. Indeed. Now, Joe turned back to the tactical display. Let's bring our people home. 1 month later, Captain Alexandra Novak stood at the observation window of the Medical Rehabilitation Center on Luna, watching Earth rise above the lunar horizon. The blue-white sphere, scattered with swirls of cloud, looked impossibly fragile from this distance. The door behind her slid open, and she turned to see Specialist Williams entering, assisted by a mobility exoskeleton, but otherwise looking remarkably recovered. They letting you out soon, Specialist? She asked. Williams grinned. 2 more days of physical therapy, then I'm cleared for light duty. These new regeneration protocols are something else. The doctors say I shouldn't even have survived that hit. Glad you did, Novak replied simply. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching Earth's slow rotation. Lieutenant Jones stopped by earlier, Williams said eventually. Says they're reassigning our unit to exploration duties, pushing out beyond the DMZ. Novak nodded. Makes sense. We've got a lot of new eyes on us now. The other spacefaring species want to see what humans do next. And what is that exactly? Williams asked. Go back to being peaceful explorers and pretend we didn't just reveal we're sitting on tech that terrifies the entire galaxy? You can't put the genie back in the bottle, Novak conceded. But you can demonstrate that you're responsible with the power you've revealed. She turned to face him fully. The ethics committees are already reconvening. Most of the experimental weapons are being locked down again, tighter security this time. But not all of them. Some technologies have dual applications. The medical breakthroughs alone have revolutionized treatment protocols. Williams gestured to his rapidly healing body. No argument there. A soft alert chimed from Novak's comm unit. She checked it briefly. That's my cue. Transport to Earth leaves in 30 minutes. Back to the homeworld? Williams inquired. Thought you were a space jockey through and through. Novak smiled slightly. Temporary assignment. I've been asked to speak at the United Nations about my experiences on the front lines. Apparently civilian leadership wants first-hand accounts to inform the new defensive doctrine they're developing. What will you tell them? She considered the question carefully. That humanity should never again be caught unprepared. That ethical restraint is a virtue, but not at the expense of existence. Novak paused, looking back at the Earth. And that the universe now knows exactly what happens when someone mistakes our kindness for weakness. Williams nodded slowly. They unleashed hell. And we responded with something far worse. Human ingenuity unchained from its conscience. Novak clapped him gently on the shoulder. Get well soon, Specialist. The stars are waiting. As she walked away, Williams turned back to the window, watching Earthrise and contemplating a galaxy that would never again underestimate the deceptively peaceful blue world hanging in the void. In the aftermath of what historians would later call the Drastian incursion, a peculiar change swept through galactic diplomatic channels. Species that had previously regarded humanity as primitive newcomers suddenly found urgent reasons to establish formal relations. Trade delegations arrived, cultural exchanges were proposed, and throughout it all, humanity went back to exploration, to science, to art and commerce, and all the peaceful pursuits that had defined their expansion into space before the Drastians arrived. But something had changed, not in humanity itself, but in how the galaxy perceived them. For they had revealed a truth that resonated across the stars, that the most dangerous predators are not those who bare their fangs at every opportunity, but those who evolve to hide them except in the direst necessity. In the Grand Archive of the Arcturian Confederation, a new entry was quietly added to the file on humanity, classified at the highest level. It contained only a single observation from Ambassador Vkr'lak. Beware the species that creates monsters, cages them on moral grounds, and remembers exactly where they keep the key. End. You know, for a species that's supposedly primitive, you humans have an absolutely terrifying capacity for violence, chittered Ambassador Vkr'lak, his mandibles clicking nervously as he sipped the strange brown liquid humans called coffee. Says the 9-foot-tall insectoid with built-in biological weaponry, replied Lieutenant Jack Harper with a snort, leaning back in his chair at the diplomatic station's cafeteria. Besides, we're not violent. We're passionate. There's a difference. Vkr'lak's compound eyes glittered with what passed for amusement in our Vaxian culture. Ah yes, passion. The convenient excuse your kind uses when you tear through obstacles that should, by all reasonable metrics, completely obliterate you. Hey, we've been model citizens in the Galactic Confederation for the past 15 years, Jack protested, though his smirk suggested he wasn't particularly offended. Name one incident in the last 5 years where humans have caused any real trouble. The ambassador's antennae twitched thoughtfully. Perhaps you're right. The integration has been smoother than our predictive models anticipated, though I still maintain humans are unpredictable. We prefer the term adaptable, Jack countered, draining his coffee mug. It's what got us through the Great Filter while countless other species went extinct. Some might call it stubbornness, but we just call it Tuesday. The casual banter between the human military liaison and the alien diplomat was interrupted by the station-wide announcement system. A calm, genderless voice echoed through the cafeteria. Attention! Unscheduled ship approaching Docking Bay 7. Security personnel to positions. This is not a drill. Jack's relaxed demeanor instantly shifted, his posture straightening as he checked his comm device. Duty calls, Ambassador. Rain check on the whole humans are terrifying conversation? Of course, Lieutenant, Vkr'lak replied, his own communicator buzzing with diplomatic updates, though the unfolding situation may provide fresh evidence for my thesis. Station Security Officer Alexis Torres was having a relatively peaceful shift until the alarms blared. As the only human on her security team, she was used to standing out, not just for her comparative lack of height, extra limbs, or exoskeletal plating, but for what her alien colleagues called her unpredictable mammalian responses. Right now, that meant she was the only one who wasn't following standard containment protocol as they surrounded the unmarked vessel that had forcibly docked with the station. Torres, maintain formation, hissed her supervisor, Captain Vkr'lak, his reptilian scales flaring with annoyance. The intruders have not yet— They're not intruders, Alexis interrupted, lowering her weapon slightly as the ship's airlock hissed open. Look at the hull markings. That's a Vkr'lakian civilian transport, and it's taken heavy damage. Those plasma burns weren't self-inflicted. The security team's formation wavered as the first passengers emerged. Small, furry creatures with 6 limbs and wide, frightened eyes. Cubs. Vkr'lakian cubs, no more than the equivalent of human toddlers, stumbling out in a disorganized cluster, some crying in their high-pitched, trilling language. Where are the adults? Muttered Vkr'lak, his weapon still raised but uncertainty now evident in his posture. Alexis was already moving, holstering her weapon and kneeling to meet the first cub that approached her. Hey there, little one. You're safe now. Is anyone hurt? The cub trilled something incomprehensible, but the universal fear in its eyes needed no translation. Behind this first wave of young Vkr'lakians came an adult figure, but not a Vkr'lakian. Instead, a bloodied human male limped out, carrying 2 more cubs in his arms. His civilian clothing was torn and burned, a makeshift bandage wrapped around his thigh. "Need medical," he gasped, eyes unfocused. 17 cubs total. Pirate attack. Parents. Didn't make it. I was the only passenger who... He swayed dangerously, and Alexis lunged forward to catch the cubs as the man collapsed. "Medics!" she shouted, carefully setting down the frightened young aliens while checking the human's pulse. "And get these cubs to safe housing immediately." As the station's emergency protocols kicked in, Alexis found herself cradling a particularly small Vkr'lak cub, who seemed unwilling to leave the unconscious human's side. Its large eyes were fixed on the man's face, tiny paws gripping his tattered sleeve. "Don't worry," she whispered to the cub, though she knew her words weren't understood. "He saved you, and now we'll save him. That's what humans do." 3 days later, Jack Harper found himself in an unexpected situation. Babysitting. More accurately, he was supervising the temporary care facility that had been set up for the orphaned Vkr'lak cubs, while the Galactic Confederation determined their fate. He wasn't alone in this task. Various station personnel had volunteered time to help care for the traumatized youngsters. But he'd taken a particular interest after hearing the full story. "So you're telling me a single unarmed civilian took on 7 Orxian pirates?" Jack asked incredulously, watching as the human in question, now identified as Marcos Reed, a freelance xenobotanist, sat on the floor surrounded by attentive cubs. Despite his still healing injuries, Marcos was animatedly telling a story, complete with exaggerated hand gestures that had the little aliens chittering with something approximating laughter. "That's what the ship's security footage shows," confirmed Dr. Lyra Bennett, the station's chief medical officer. "Though took on might be generous. Survived long enough to escape with the cubs would be more accurate." She reviewed something on her tablet before continuing. "Multiple lacerations, second-degree plasma burns, 3 broken ribs, and a concussion. He shouldn't have been conscious, let alone piloting a damaged ship through an asteroid field." Jack nodded thoughtfully. "Adrenaline is one hell of a drug." "It's more than that," Dr. Bennett replied. "His blood work showed stress hormone levels that should have caused cardiac arrest. We're still trying to understand how he maintained enough fine motor control to fly that ship." Their conversation was interrupted by Ambassador Vkr'lak, who approached with an unusually large delegation of various alien officials. The Vkr'lak representative, a tall, furred biped with distinctive facial markings, stepped forward immediately, bypassing proper diplomatic channels to hurry toward the cubs. "The children appear unharmed," the Vkr'lak noted with obvious relief. "This is unexpected. When we received word of the attack, we feared the worst." "You can thank Mr. Reed over there," Jack said, gesturing toward Marcos. Apparently, he decided that dying wasn't on his agenda, especially not when he had 17 kids to protect. The Vkr'lak representative's ears flattened against their head, a sign of confusion. "One human protected all these cubs against Orxian raiders? How is this possible? Orxians are Class 3 predators with natural armor and toxin glands." "Yeah, well, humans can be pretty resourceful when the situation calls for it," Jack replied with deliberate understatement. Ambassador Vkr'lak's mandibles clicked rapidly, the Arvaxian equivalent of clearing one's throat. "Perhaps Mr. Reed could explain himself. The Confederation Council is curious about the details." All eyes turned to Marcos, who seemed to notice the officials for the first time. He gently extricated himself from the pile of cubs, wincing slightly as he stood. One particularly attached cub, the same one that had refused to leave his side at the docking bay, climbed up his leg and settled on his shoulder. "There's not much to explain," Marcos said with a shrug that belied the gravity of his actions. "I was returning from a research expedition when our transport picked up the Vkr'lak family group. Standard passenger exchange. We were about 6 hours into the journey when the raiders hit us." "And then?" prompted the Vkr'lak representative, all 4 ears now perked forward in attention. Marcos scratched his beard absently, and then all hell broke loose. The Vkr'lak adults tried to fight back, but they were scientists, not warriors. When they realized they couldn't win, His voice caught slightly. "They barricaded all the cubs in the cargo hold with me, then went to hold off the Orxians." The silence in the room was profound as everyone present, human and alien alike, processed the sacrifice the Vkr'lak parents had made. "I heard the fighting stop," Marcos continued quietly. "Then the pirates started cutting through the cargo hold door. I had maybe 2 minutes before they got through, so I did what anyone would do." "Which was?" Vkr'lak prompted. "I improvised," Marcos said with a thin smile. "Turns out my research samples included some pretty volatile compounds that, when mixed properly, create a quite impressive smokescreen. And Orxians, for all their natural weapons, have absolutely terrible vision in low visibility conditions. Jack couldn't help but grin. Classic human understatement for what must have been a desperate, terrifying situation. The smoke bought me enough time to get the cubs to the emergency shuttle, Marcos continued. But one of the pirates figured out what I was doing and followed us. I had to convince him to stay behind. The clinical detachment in Marcos's voice told Jack everything he needed to know about what convincing had entailed. The station's security report had mentioned one Orxian body recovered from the wreckage of the transport ship. Cause of death listed as multiple traumatic injuries consistent with blunt force trauma. Anyway, Marcos said, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. The shuttle was damaged during our escape. Navigation was shot, and life support was failing. This station was the closest safe harbor I could reach. The Vkr'lak representative stepped forward, towering over Marcos, and performed the elaborate bow reserved for their highest honors. You faced certain death to protect children not of your species, not of your world. The Vkr'lak collective acknowledges this life debt. Marcos looked genuinely embarrassed. Really, it wasn't. The Galactic Confederation would also like to formally recognize your actions, interrupted an officious-looking Tellurian diplomat, their bioluminescent tendrils pulsing with formal patterns. There will be a ceremony, of course. That's really not necessary, Marcos protested, unconsciously reaching up to steady the cub still perched on his shoulder. Anyone would have done the same. Kvek's compound eyes swiveled toward Jack, who merely raised an eyebrow in response. They both knew that wasn't true. Many species in the Confederation operated on strict self-preservation protocols. The concept of sacrificing oneself for unrelated juveniles, especially of another species, was not universal. Nevertheless, the Tellurian continued, recognition will be given, and discussions must be had regarding the future of these orphaned cubs. At this, the cub on Marcos's shoulder let out a distressed trill, tiny claws digging into the fabric of his shirt. The other cubs, who had been quietly playing or resting, also began vocalizing their alarm. They understand more than you think, Marcos said, his voice suddenly hard. And they've been through enough without being treated like cargo to be redistributed. The Vkr'lak representative's fur bristled slightly. The cubs will be placed with appropriate families within our collective, of course. Their well-being is paramount. Then maybe don't discuss their fate like they're not in the room, Marcos replied, his tone making it clear this wasn't a suggestion. Jack stepped forward, recognizing the signs of a human about to cause a diplomatic incident. Perhaps we could continue this discussion in the conference room. The cubs need their rest, and Mr. Reed still requires medical attention. The aliens agreed, though not without some grumbling from the more bureaucratic elements of the delegation. As they filed out, Dr. Bennett approached Marcos, medical scanner in hand. Your stress indicators are elevated again, she noted with professional concern. You need to rest. Marcos nodded absently, his attention on the cub still clinging to his shoulder. What's going to happen to them? He asked quietly. Protocol dictates they'll be returned to their homeworld, Dr. Bennett replied. The Vkr'lak have extensive support systems for orphans. They'll be well cared for. Even this little one? Marcos asked, gently touching the cub's head. She hasn't let go of me since the transport. The doctor who examined her said she witnessed her parents' deaths. Dr. Bennett's expression softened. Separation trauma is complex across species, but yes, even her. The Vkr'lak understand their own kind better than we ever could. Marcos didn't look convinced, but he nodded anyway, carefully detaching the cub from his shoulder to place her with her siblings. The small alien immediately began a high-pitched keening that made everyone in the room wince. Just a few more days, he whispered to her. I'll visit every day until you go home, I promise. 1 week later, the diplomatic situation had evolved in unexpected ways. What should have been a straightforward process of repatriating the orphaned cubs had become a complex negotiation involving multiple species, legal frameworks, and, most surprisingly, one very stubborn human. He's filed for guardianship, Jack explained to Ambassador Kvek as they observed the Confederation Council meeting from the station's diplomatic viewing room. On the main screen, Marcos Reed stood before representatives of 17 different species, calmly presenting his case. Of all 17 cubs. Preposterous, Kvek chittered, mandibles working overtime in agitation. No precedent exists for cross-species adoption on this scale. The biological requirements alone make it impractical, not to mention the cultural implications. He's not arguing for adoption in the traditional sense, Jack clarified. More like fostership, until they're old enough to make their own choices. and he's got support from an unexpected quarter. On the screen, the Vkr'lakian representative was speaking. While unprecedented, we cannot ignore the clear attachment formed between these cubs and their human protector. Vkr'lakian young form strong psychological bonds during traumatic events, bonds that, if severed prematurely, can cause lasting developmental harm. That's not what the Vkr'lakian collective initially stated, Kvex noted, compound eyes narrowing in suspicion. Jack smirked. Let's just say Marcos has been very thorough in his research on Vkr'lakian developmental psychology over the past week, and very persuasive in private meetings with the representative. The screen showed Marcos again, now with the smallest cub, apparently named Takir, perched on his shoulder in what had become her customary position. I'm not asking to replace their culture or heritage, he was saying. I'm requesting the opportunity to provide stability during their critical development period, with full cultural education provided by Vkr'lakian specialists. I've already secured a teaching position at the Interspecies Research Institute on Proxima Centauri 3, which has a significant Vkr'lakian population. And the human has resources for this undertaking? Asked a skeptical draconian counselor, scales gleaming under the chamber lights. My research grants have been combined with the reparation funds from the Orxian Piracy Task Force, Marcos replied. Additionally, the Xenobotanical Society has offered supplementary funding for my continued work, which can be conducted from the Institute. The discussion continued, with various counselors raising concerns, and Marcos calmly addressing each one. Jack had to admire the man's composure. Most humans would be intimidated by the full Confederation Council, but Marcos spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who had already faced down worse odds and emerged victorious. He will succeed, Kvex said suddenly, antennae twitching in resignation. You think so? Jack asked, though he agreed. Humans always succeed when they exhibit this particular behavioral pattern, the ambassador replied. The calm voice, the reasonable arguments masking an absolutely immovable core position. Your species is peculiarly capable of appearing flexible, while being utterly intransigent on matters you have decided are important. Jack laughed. We call it digging in our heels, and yeah, Marcos has definitely done that. The council appeared to be reaching its decision. Various representatives were conferring, with the Vkr'lakian delegation clearly advocating in Marcos's favor. Finally, the head counselor, a venerable Ashraki with translucent skin revealing the complex thoughts literally flowing through their neural pathways, spoke. The council recognizes the unprecedented nature of this request, but also acknowledges the unprecedented circumstances that led to it. Guardianship is provisionally granted to Marcos Reed, with quarterly reviews for the first 3 cycles, and mandatory cultural education to be administered by Vkr'lakian specialists. Further details will be outlined in the formal agreement. The station's viewing room erupted in surprised murmurs from the various diplomatic staff watching the proceedings. Jack glanced at Kvex, who seemed resigned rather than shocked. You called it, Jack said, though I'm surprised the council went along with it so easily. Easily is a relative term, Kvex replied, gesturing to the timestamp on the viewing screen. The council has been deliberating for nearly 14 standard hours, and I suspect they recognized what I did, that the human would not accept any other outcome. Jack raised an eyebrow. You think he would have defied the Confederation Council? Kvex's mandibles clicked in what Jack had come to recognize as the Arvaxian equivalent of a sardonic smile. Lieutenant Harper, I have studied your species extensively. What do you think a human would do if bureaucracy attempted to separate them from young ones they had decided to protect? The question was rhetorical, and they both knew the answer. Jack found himself oddly proud of this truth, even as he recognized how alarming it must seem to other species. Humans might present themselves as reasonable, civilized members of the galactic community, but there were certain lines that, once crossed, revealed the primal creature that still lived beneath the surface of human sophistication. Well, Jack said finally, I guess we should prepare the adoption celebration. It's a human tradition after all. The adoption celebration, as it turned out, became something of an interspecies cultural exchange. The station's largest recreation area had been converted into a festive space, with decorations representing both human and Vkr'lakian traditions. Various station personnel and diplomatic representatives mingled, many openly curious about the unprecedented arrangement. Alexis Torres, now off duty, found herself chatting with Dr. Bennett near the refreshment table. I still can't believe the council approved it, she said, watching as Marcos navigated the crowd with Takir still firmly attached to his shoulder. The other cubs were either playing in a designated area or being carried by various human volunteers who had helped care for them over the past weeks.
I can, Dr. Bennett replied, sipping something that glowed faintly blue.
You should have seen the neurological synchronization scans. Somehow, despite completely different brain structures, Marcos and those cubs, especially Takir, have developed a bond that registers on medical instruments. It's unprecedented in xenobiology. Alexis raised an eyebrow. Are you saying they're telepathic? Nothing so dramatic, the doctor clarified. More like, their nervous systems have adapted to read each other's cues at a subconscious level. It's similar to what happens between human parents and infants, but occurring across species. We're writing a paper on it. Their conversation was interrupted as Ambassador Kvex approached, accompanied by a human Alexis didn't recognize, a woman in the formal uniform of the Confederation Diplomatic Corps. Officer Torres, Kvex greeted her, mandibles clicking politely. May I introduce Diplomat Olivia Blackwell? She has been assigned to document this unique situation for the Confederation archives. Just trying to keep up with events, Olivia said with a wry smile, offering her hand in the human custom despite the formal Confederation setting. Though I admit, I never expected my first major assignment would involve a human adopting 17 alien children. First contact protocols didn't cover this scenario? Alexis asked with a grin. Surprisingly, no, Olivia replied. Though perhaps they should have. Humans do seem to have a pattern of adopting anything that triggers our caregiving instincts, regardless of species. Kvex's antennae twitched in what might have been amusement. Indeed, in my studies of Earth history, I noted humans have domesticated numerous species simply because they found them, what is your term, cute? That's oversimplifying it a bit, Dr. Bennett protested, though her smile suggested she didn't entirely disagree. The conversation might have continued in this academic vein had it not been for the sudden commotion at the entrance to the recreation area. A group of security officers had surrounded several new arrivals, tall, heavily armored figures with distinctive ridge patterns identifying them as Orxians. What are they doing here? Alexis muttered, instinctively reaching for the weapon she wasn't carrying while off duty. Diplomatic immunity, Kvex explained quietly. Those are representatives from the Orxian hegemony, here to formally disavow the pirates who attacked the transport and present reparations to the Vkr'lak collective. That's their story, Olivia added, her diplomatic training evident in her neutral tone despite the clear skepticism in her eyes. Convenient timing, though. The Orxian delegation moved through the celebration, their presence creating a palpable tension. Even species with no direct connection to the incident seemed uncomfortable, conversations dying as the armored figures passed. They headed directly for the Vkr'lak representative, who stood stiffly as the lead Orxian presented a ceremonial container, presumably containing the promised reparations. What happened next occurred so quickly that later accounts would differ on the exact sequence of events. The lead Orxian, after presenting the reparation container, made a gesture toward the cubs' play area. The movement might have been innocent, but it triggered an immediate reaction from both the cubs, who began emitting high-pitched distress calls, and from Takir, who suddenly buried her face against Marcos's neck, trembling violently. Marcos, who had been engaged in conversation with a Tellurian scientist, went completely still. The transformation that came over him was subtle but unmistakable to anyone watching closely, particularly to the humans in the room. His posture shifted, his expression blanked, and something ancient and dangerous flickered behind his eyes. That's not good, Alexis murmured, already moving toward the potential confrontation. Jack Harper, also spotting the warning signs, was doing the same from across the room. The lead Orxian, either oblivious to or dismissive of the human's change in demeanor, continued speaking to the Vkr'lak representative. Of course, our government would be willing to take responsibility for the orphans as further demonstration of our regret for this unfortunate incident. We have excellent rehabilitation facilities. No. Marcos's voice wasn't particularly loud, but it cut through the ambient noise of the celebration like a blade. Takir was still clinging to him, now making a continuous distressed keening. The Orxian turned slowly, regarding Marcos with the dismissive air that many physically imposing species reserved for humans. This is a diplomatic matter between established Confederation members. The alien rumbled, voice modulated through translation tech. Your input is not required, human. What happened next would later be described in the official incident report as a regrettable misunderstanding arising from cross-species communication failures. What actually happened was that the Orxian made a fundamental error. He reached toward Takir, perhaps intending to demonstrate the Orxian ability to care for Vkr'lak young. Marcos moved with a speed that surprised even those familiar with human capabilities. One moment he was standing still. The next, his free arm had intercepted the Orxian's reaching hand, gripping the alien's wrist with enough force that the translation tech picked up and converted the resulting sound into a pained grunt. "Don't touch her." Each word emerged precise and deadly calm, a stark contrast to the white-knuckled grip Marcos maintained on the much larger alien's arm. The Orxian delegation immediately shifted to defensive postures, hands moving to weapons that diplomatic protocol prevented them from actually drawing in the station. Station security responded in kind, creating a tense standoff with Marcos and the terrified Takir at its center. "Mr. Reed," Captain Vkr'lak said cautiously, his reptilian features arranged in what he hoped was a calming expression. "Please release the ambassador's attaché." Marcos didn't appear to hear him. His focus remained entirely on the Orxian, whose arm he still held in a grip that must have been causing significant discomfort, judging by the alien's increasingly agitated breathing. "They have his scent," Marcos said, his voice now dangerously quiet. "Takir recognizes it, don't you?" This last was directed at the cub, who had raised her head slightly and was now staring at the Orxian with unmistakable terror. Understanding rippled through the gathering. The Orxian diplomatic delegation included at least one member of the pirate crew that had massacred the Vrekian parents. Ambassador Kvex moved forward, mandibles working rapidly as he processed this development. "A serious accusation, Mr. Reed. The Confederation cannot act without evidence." "Takir is the evidence," Marcos replied, still not releasing the increasingly angry Orxian. "Vrekians have olfactory memory capabilities far superior to humans. She remembers him." The standoff might have escalated further had Jack not stepped in with remarkable diplomatic timing. "Perhaps we could resolve this with a simple identity verification. Standard Confederation security protocols allow for non-invasive biometric scanning when allegations of this nature are made." The lead Orxian diplomat bristled, ridges flaring in agitation. "We are here under diplomatic protection! This is outrageous!" "What's outrageous?" Marcos said, his voice still unnervingly calm despite the obvious tension in every line of his body. "Is that you brought one of the murderers to an event celebrating the survival of his intended victims." The diplomatic impasse stretched thin as various species representatives conferred hurriedly. The cubs, sensing the tension, had huddled together in their play area, supervised closely by station personnel. Only Takir remained apart, still clinging to Marcos with an iron grip that would likely have injured a human child of equivalent size. Finally, the Vrekian representative stepped forward. "We request formal identity verification under Statute 17 of the Confederation Charter. If the Orxian delegation has nothing to hide, this should present no difficulty." Backed into a diplomatic corner, the Orxian leadership had little choice but to agree. Security personnel brought forward scanning equipment, and one by one the Orxian delegation submitted to identification procedures. When they reached the individual Marcos had confronted, the scanner emitted a series of sharp tones. Captain Vkr'lak checked the readout, his scales darkening in the reptilian equivalent of a frown. "Genetic markers match those found on weapons recovered from the transport wreckage. Probability of identity match, 98.7%. The recreation area erupted in shocked exclamations as security moved to detain the exposed pirate. The Orxian, realizing he was caught, made a desperate lunge, not toward an exit, but toward Marcos and Takir. Whether motivated by vengeance or some twisted attempt to secure a hostage was never determined, because he never reached his target. Marcos, still holding Takir securely with one arm, sidestepped the charge with surprising grace for someone encumbered by a child. As the Orxian passed, Marcos's free hand shot out, gripping one of the alien's armored ridges and using the attacker's own momentum to slam him face-first into the floor with a sickening crack. Before security could intervene, Marcos had planted one foot firmly on the back of the stunned Orxian's neck, applying just enough pressure to make his intentions clear, without causing permanent damage. "I've already killed one of your crew," he said, voice pitched low but carrying in the sudden silence of the room. "That was necessity. This would be choice. Do you understand the difference?" The Orxian, face still pressed to the floor, made a sound that might have been acknowledgement or simply pain. Security officers quickly moved in, securing the pirate with restraints designed to hold even his species' considerable strength. As the immediate danger passed, the adrenaline that had carried Marcos through the confrontation seemed to ebb. He swayed slightly, face paling as the reality of what had just occurred set in. Dr. Bennett was at his side immediately, scanner already assessing his condition. "Stress indicators off the charts again," she muttered. "You need to sit down before you collapse." "I'm fine." Marcos insisted, though he allowed himself to be guided to a nearby chair. Takir remained clinging to him, but her distress calls had quieted to occasional whimpers. The diplomatic fallout was immediate and chaotic. The remaining Orxian delegation protested their innocence while simultaneously disavowing their exposed member. The Vkr'lak representative demanded a full investigation into potential Orxian government involvement in what was now clearly not a simple piracy incident but a targeted attack. Through it all, Marcos sat quietly, focused entirely on calming Takir and the other cubs, who had been brought to him once the danger passed. The contrast was striking. The same human who moments ago had taken down an armed predatory alien 3 times his size was now gently stroking Takir's fur, humming a soft melody that seemed to soothe the traumatized young aliens. Ambassador Kvex found himself standing beside Jack, both watching the aftermath unfold. "Your thesis about human unpredictability is looking stronger," Jack commented. "Not unpredictability," Kvex corrected, compound eyes fixed on Marcos and the cubs. "Duality. The capacity to shift instantly between nurturing caregiver and lethal protector. Most species specialize in one or the other. Humans seem uniquely adapted to be both simultaneously." Jack considered this. "You know what we call that? Being a parent." Kvex's antennae twitched thoughtfully. "Perhaps that explains why your kind has survived despite your physical limitations. The most dangerous creature in any ecosystem is not the most venomous or the strongest. It's a mother protecting her young," Jack finished, nodding. "Or in this case, a father." 6 months later, the Proxima Centauri Research Institute had adjusted to its newest and most unusual residence. The habitat specially designed for Marcos and his 17 Vkr'lak wards had become something of a local attraction, though strict protocols limited visitors to prevent overwhelming the still recovering cubs. Jack Harper, on official liaison duty that brought him to the institute, found himself sitting in Marcos's office, surrounded by a mix of xenobotanical specimens and children's artwork. Takir, now significantly larger but still insisting on her shoulder perch whenever possible, was contentedly sorting colored markers at a small desk in the corner. "The Orxian government is still denying official involvement," Jack was saying, accepting the coffee Marcos offered. "But the evidence recovered from the captured pirate was damning. Turns out the Vkr'lak scientists were onto something big, a biotechnology breakthrough that would have undermined the Orxian monopoly on certain pharmaceutical compounds." Marcos nodded, unsurprised. Corporate espionage turned to murder, not exactly an uplifting example of interspecies cooperation. "No," Jack agreed. "But what happened afterward might be." Hayes had to laugh. "Are you suggesting they're actually beneficial?" "The Coalition has debated this very question for centuries," Lycia admitted. "There's a theory that the Concordate serves as a type of filter, species intelligent enough to see through their deception, and resourceful enough to turn the situation to their advantage may be better prepared for the complexities of interstellar politics." "A test, you mean?" "Not by design, but in effect, perhaps." Lycia led them into what appeared to be a conference room. "And it seems humanity passed with flying colors. Not only did you expose their deception, but you leveraged it to your advantage without resorting to unnecessary violence." "We considered it," Hayes admitted. "But interstellar war seemed excessive for what amounted to a cosmic phone scam." Lycia's features arranged themselves in what might have been a smile. "That kind of perspective will serve you well here, Ambassador Hayes. The Coalition values measured responses and diplomatic solutions." The door at the far end of the room opened, and a procession of varied beings entered, clearly representatives of multiple species. "The Coalition Diplomatic Council will see you now, Ambassador," Lycia said. "They are quite eager to meet the species that turned the Concordat's scam to their advantage." The diplomatic reception that followed was a blur of alien faces, incomprehensible customs, and careful translations. Hayes did her best to represent humanity with dignity and openness, fielding countless questions about Earth and human society. "I must ask," said one counselor, a gelatinous being contained in what appeared to be a hovering environmental suit. "How did your species determine that the Concordate was not being truthful?" Hayes considered the question. "Inconsistencies in their story. The scale of the supposed threats versus the modest size of their protective force. And honestly, the convenience of these Vraxian ships appearing right after we refused their offer." She paused. "Also, humans have a long history of running similar scams on each other, so we recognize the pattern." This prompted what she assumed was laughter from several of the council members. "Fascinating," said another counselor, this one appearing almost avian. "Most species either accept the Concordat's protection, or attempt to destroy them once the deception is revealed. Your measured response is unusual. We were more interested in the bigger picture, Hayes explained. Finding the actual galactic community seemed more important than punishing a handful of con artists. The central counselor, a tall humanoid with silvery skin, leaned forward. And now that you have found us, Ambassador Hayes, what does humanity want from the Coalition? Hayes had prepared for this question extensively with her team. Knowledge, trade, cultural exchange. The usual things one might expect. But mostly, we want to understand our place in the wider universe and establish peaceful relations with our galactic neighbors. Admirable goals, the Silver Counselor said, though I sense there is more you're not saying. Hayes hesitated, then decided honesty was the best approach. Earth has had exactly one first contact experience before coming here, and it was with interstellar con artists. You'll forgive us if we're a bit cautious about taking things at face value. This prompted more alien laughter. A healthy skepticism will serve you well in Coalition space, the avian counselor said. Not all species are as straightforward as they appear. That sounds ominous, Hayes noted. Not at all, the Silver Counselor assured her. Simply realistic. The Coalition maintains peace and promotes cooperation, but we are not a utopia. There are conflicts, disagreements, and yes, even the occasional attempt at deception. Politics remains politics, regardless of biology. That, at least, is familiar territory, Hayes said. Indeed, the Silver Counselor rose. Ambassador Hayes, the Coalition Diplomatic Council formally acknowledges humanity and the Solar Alliance. We invite Earth to begin the process of association, the first step toward potential membership. We accept, Hayes said, feeling the weight of the moment. On behalf of all humanity, we look forward to joining the galactic community. As the formalities concluded and the reception continued, Hayes found herself by a viewport overlooking the gas giant below, taking a moment to process everything that had happened. Quite a view, came a voice beside her. It was Commander Vkr'lak, the insectoid security officer who had first greeted the ambassador. It is, Hayes agreed, though I'm still trying to wrap my head around being here at all. 6 months ago, we thought we were alone in the universe. And then the Concordat found you, Vkr'lak said, mandibles clicking in what she now recognized as amusement. Lucky us, Hayes said dryly. You might be surprised to hear this, but it may have been fortunate after all, the commander said. The Concordat inadvertently does us a service. So Lycia mentioned, a test of sorts. More than that, Vkr'lak said. Consider, how would you have reacted if a genuinely powerful alien force had appeared in your system with technology centuries beyond yours? Would you have approached with confidence or fear? Hayes considered this. Probably fear, she admitted. Exactly. But instead you encountered the Concordat, advanced enough to impress, but not to truly threaten. And when you discovered their deception, it gave your species confidence. Confidence? The knowledge that you could hold your own among the stars, Vkr'lak explained. That not every advanced species would be incomprehensibly beyond you. That the galaxy might contain frauds and charlatans, but that you could handle them. Hayes realized he was right. If Earth's first contact had been with the full might of the Coalition, humanity might have felt hopelessly outclassed. So the Concordat is like galactic training wheels? She suggested. Vkr'lak's translator took a moment with that one. An interesting metaphor, but not entirely inaccurate. Many emerging species benefit from discovering that not all advanced civilizations are godlike in power or wisdom. That's a surprisingly positive take on interstellar con artists. The galaxy is complex, Ambassador Hayes. Few things are entirely good or entirely bad. Vkr'lak gestured to the gathering behind them. Take the Coalition itself. We maintain peace and promote cooperation. But we also have our share of politicking, resource competitions, and philosophical disagreements. Sounds a lot like Earth, Hayes noted. Precisely my point. For all our biological differences, certain patterns emerge across species. The desire for advantage, the formation of communities, the tension between competition and cooperation. Vkr'lak turned his compound eyes toward her. The Concordat showed you a cartoonish version of galactic politics, big scary predators and noble protectors. The reality is far more human, I suppose you might say. Hayes laughed at that. So we fit right in then? Better than you might think, Vkr'lak agreed. Your species saw through the Concordat's deception, leveraged the situation to your advantage, and found your way here without resorting to unnecessary violence. That suggests a maturity that will serve you well. High praise from someone who just met us. First impressions matter, Skrik said. And humanity's first impression on the Coalition is of a species that asked the right question when offered protection. From what? Hayes said, recalling her own skepticism.